The massive ships appeared without warning, blotting out the sun over every major city on Earth. Their hulls gleamed like polished obsidian, each vessel stretching kilometers across the sky. For 3 days, they simply hung there in silence, casting shadows that plunged millions into an eerie twilight. Then came the message. It wasn't transmitted through radio waves or satellite networks. Instead, it burned itself directly into every human mind simultaneously, regardless of language or location. The voice was cold, mechanical, devoid of any emotion that humans could recognize. Attention, inhabitants of the third planet. You are hereby ordered to evacuate this world within 30 rotations of your local star. This planet has been selected for rehabilitation and repurposing. Your species will be relocated to designated preservation zones in the Outer Rim territories. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance is futile. The message repeated every 6 hours for a week. In the emergency session of the United Nations, delegates from every nation gathered in unprecedented unity. The Secretary General, Maria Santos, stood before the assembly with grim determination etched on her weathered face. She had survived 3 wars and 2 global pandemics, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "we face a choice that will define not just our generation, but the very existence of humanity itself." The Chinese representative leaned forward. "Our analysis suggests their technology is centuries beyond ours. Their ships alone demonstrate gravitational manipulation we can barely comprehend." "And yet," interrupted President Morrison from the United States, "they're giving us 30 days. If they could simply erase us, why the warning? Why the timeline?" Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead xenobiologist hastily appointed to the first-ever Alien Contact Committee, cleared her throat. "I've been studying their communication patterns. The terminology they use suggests they view us as wildlife. The word rehabilitation implies they see our planet as damaged. The preservation zones concept treats us like an endangered species they're relocating to a zoo." A murmur of anger rippled through the assembly. The Russian ambassador slammed his fist on the table. "We are not animals to be herded." "No," Santos replied quietly. "But we are also not equipped to fight starships that can manipulate gravity." Outside the UN building, the world held its breath. Some cities saw mass evacuations as people fled to remote areas, hoping distance from population centers would offer safety. Others witnessed riots and looting as social order began to crumble. But in most places, something remarkable happened. People gathered in town squares, parks, and community centers. They shared stories, food, and fears. Strangers became neighbors. Ancient rivalries seemed petty in the face of extinction. Children drew pictures of Earth and hung them in windows. Elderly couples sat on porches, holding hands and watching the alien ships with defiant calm. In Australia, Aboriginal elders spoke of their ancestors' connection to the land that stretched back 60,000 years. In the Amazon, indigenous tribes who had never seen technology beyond steel tools looked up at the ships and shook their heads. This was their home, and homes were not abandoned. Social media exploded with the hashtag Dr. Earth is ours. Videos showed farmers tending their fields beneath alien shadows, teachers holding classes outdoors while pointing at the ships as examples of applied physics, and children playing soccer in streets while their parents organized neighborhood watches. The message from the ships continued its monotonous cycle, but humans began to respond in ways the aliens clearly hadn't anticipated. Street artists covered walls with murals depicting humans standing firm against impossible odds. Musicians performed concerts in parks directly beneath the ships, their defiant songs echoing off alien hulls. Scientists worked around the clock, not to find ways to escape, but to understand their oppressors. The most telling moment came when a group of children in Mumbai attached thousands of colorful balloons to a message written in crayon. "This is our planet. We're not leaving. You leave. The balloons drifted up toward the nearest ship and popped harmlessly against its hull. The message fluttered down like confetti. By the end of the first week, the alien ships had received over 1 billion individual responses. Most were simply 2 words. Hell no. As the deadline approached, something shifted in the global consciousness. The fear remained, but it was being rapidly overwhelmed by something more powerful. The stubborn, unreasonable, absolutely human refusal to be told what to do. The aliens had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had given humanity time to think, to organize, and to remember who they were, and humans, when cornered, had never been known for their reasonableness. The 20th day arrived with a new message burning into human consciousness. This time, the voice carried what might have been irritation. Warning: compliance levels remain at 0%. Immediate evacuation is required. Failure to comply will result in enforcement protocols. Dr. Sarah Chen, working frantically in the hastily established Joint Defense Command Center beneath NORAD, looked up from her screens. "They're getting frustrated," she announced to the room full of military leaders and scientists. "Their language patterns show deviation from the original script." General Martinez nodded grimly. "Which means they're about to stop asking nicely." The answer came at dawn on the 21st day. The ships descended lower, close enough that their shadows became absolute darkness. Then, without warning, beams of pale blue light erupted from their undersides. The beams didn't destroy anything, but where they touched, every electronic device simply died. Not damaged, not overloaded, dead, as if the very concept of electrical current had been forbidden. Entire cities went dark. Satellites tumbled from orbit. Cars stopped running. Even simple LED flashlights became useless chunks of metal and plastic. But humanity had learned a few things about survival over the millennia. Within hours, ham radio operators discovered that vacuum tube technology still functioned. Ancient shortwave radios crackled to life. Telegraph systems that hadn't been used in decades suddenly became vital communication networks. The Amish communities, barely affected by the loss of technology they'd never relied upon, became crucial hubs for coordinating response efforts. In Japan, elderly engineers who remembered pre-transistor technology emerged from retirement to help rebuild basic electronics using methods from the 1940s. In rural areas worldwide, people who had maintained old equipment found themselves suddenly invaluable. The aliens had targeted human technology, but they had underestimated human adaptability. Dr. Chen managed to establish contact with research teams worldwide using a modified 1950s radio transmitter. "They've created an electromagnetic dead zone," her voice crackled through the static. "But it's specifically tuned to solid-state electronics. They've never encountered a species that maintained legacy technology. In response to the blackout, something remarkable happened. Without television, internet, or modern distractions, people talked to each other. They organized in ways that would have been impossible in the digital age. Message runners carried information between neighborhoods. Town criers stood on corners sharing news. Community meetings replaced social media. The resistance organized itself through methods older than civilization. Farmers used draft horses to move supplies. Bicycle messengers created communication networks that spanned continents. Signal fires appeared on hilltops, carrying coded messages across vast distances. The modern world had died, but humanity had lived without it for most of their existence. The aliens' next escalation came on day 23. Smaller ships, sleek silver craft the size of city buses, emerged from the massive vessels. They descended to street level and began projecting holographic maps showing designated collection points where humans were to gather for processing and relocation. The ship's loudspeakers announced in perfectly translated local languages, "Report to collection points immediately. Failure to comply will result in individual retrieval." Most humans ignored the announcement entirely. In response, the small ships began deploying collection teams. The aliens themselves finally appeared. They were tall, roughly humanoid, but stretched thin, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed more like elegant masks than biological features. Their movements were fluid, but somehow wrong. As if they weren't entirely subject to normal physics. They wore form-fitting suits that shimmered with colors that human eyes couldn't quite process. The collection teams moved through cities with mechanical efficiency, stunning humans with handheld devices and loading them into transport containers. They worked without emotion, without hurry, like farmers gathering livestock. But humans, it turned out, made very poor livestock. The first collection team that entered New York's Chinatown found the streets empty. When they spread out to search buildings, they discovered that every structure had been turned into a maze. Furniture blocked corridors. Mirrors created false passages. Tripwires activated everything from falling pots and pans to swinging logs. The aliens, accustomed to dealing with civilized species that responded logically to superior force, found themselves stumbling through what amounted to an enormous, city-sized funhouse designed by people who had generations of experience pranking each other. In London, collection teams entered the underground tunnel system and promptly became lost. The humans had removed or altered every sign, blocked passages with debris, and created false walls that looked like solid tunnel but were actually painted cloth. Some alien teams wandered in circles for hours before admitting defeat. The most effective resistance came from an unexpected source: children. Kids, unburdened by adult concepts of technological inferiority, treated the alien invasion like an elaborate game of hide-and-seek. They created hiding spots that defied adult logic, spaces too small for grown humans but perfect for children, and perfectly invisible to aliens who scanned for standard human-sized heat signatures. More importantly, children adapted to the new reality with the fluid acceptance that adults couldn't match. While parents struggled with the loss of modern conveniences, kids organized elaborate communication networks using everything from paper airplanes to trained pigeons. By the 25th day, the aliens had managed to collect fewer than 10,000 humans out of a population of 8 billion. Their efficiency ratings had plummeted from projected perfection to barely functional chaos. The next message that burned into human minds carried something new: uncertainty. Human species demonstrates unexpected non-compliance patterns. Re-evaluating extraction protocols. In the underground command center, General Martinez allowed himself a grim smile. They're learning that forcing humans to do something they don't want to do is like trying to herd cats. 8 billion very stubborn, very creative cats. On day 27, the aliens made their final mistake. They captured Professor James Wright. Wright wasn't particularly important in the grand scheme of humanity's resistance. He was just an elderly physics teacher from a small college in Vermont who had been tending his garden when a collection team found him. But Wright had spent 40 years studying acoustics and sound waves, and during his 3 hours in alien custody before a daring rescue by his former students, he observed something crucial. The aliens communicated through subsonic vibrations that their suits translated into the sounds humans heard. More importantly, their equilibrium and coordination depended entirely on an internal frequency generator that kept them stable in Earth's gravity. When Wright was freed by his students, who had approached the alien transport using nothing more sophisticated than bicycles, rope, and a well-coordinated ambush, he immediately contacted the nearest vacuum tube radio operator. "I know how to stop them," he announced over the crackling airwaves. The message spread through humanity's makeshift communication network within hours. In Australia, an Aboriginal elder named William Namatjira listened to the transmission and smiled. His people had been using didgeridoos to create subsonic frequencies for 40,000 years. In Tibet, monks who had spent lifetimes perfecting throat-singing techniques began experimenting with Wright's specifications. In Scotland, bagpipe players discovered that their ancient instruments could be modified to produce exactly the frequencies needed. But it was in New Orleans where the plan truly took shape. The city's jazz musicians, cut off from electric amplification, but never from their craft, gathered in Jackson Square. Trumpets, trombones, tubas, and drums, brass instruments needed no electricity. Word spread through the city's neighborhoods, and by evening, over 3,000 musicians had assembled. They began to play. Not music in any traditional sense, but a carefully coordinated acoustic assault based on Professor Wright's calculations. The subsonic frequencies, amplified by the natural acoustics of the city and the sheer number of instruments, created a wave of sound that human ears couldn't detect, but alien nervous systems couldn't ignore. The effect on the collection teams was immediate and dramatic. The tall, graceful aliens began stumbling like drunks. Their coordination failed. Several fell to the ground, writhing as their internal systems fought against the disruptive frequencies. Within 20 minutes, every alien in New Orleans had retreated to their ships. Word of the victory spread through ham radio networks, telegraph lines, and signal fires. The frequency specifications were transmitted to every corner of the globe. Humanity had found their weapon, and it required nothing more advanced than metal tubes and human breath. The response was swift and creative. In Vienna, the entire Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, joined by every amateur musician in the city, gathered in Schönbrunn Palace Gardens. Their performance sent sonic waves rolling across the Austrian capital that sent alien ships fleeing to higher altitudes. In India, thousands of people with traditional instruments, tabla drums, sitars, and massive temple horns, coordinated their efforts through ancient timing methods that predated atomic clocks by centuries. The most spectacular response came from Iceland. The small nation's population gathered at Reykjavik's Harpa Concert Hall, but instead of musical instruments, they brought something uniquely Icelandic, the knowledge of how to make their famous fish horns sing. These traditional instruments, carved from ram's horns and used for centuries by fishermen, produced exactly the right frequency when blown in unison. 2,000 Icelanders stood on the concert hall steps and blew their horns together. The sound was so powerful, it shattered windows 3 miles away and forced every alien ship over the island to retreat into orbit. But the humans weren't finished. Dr. Chen, working with the limited equipment available, discovered that the aliens' ships themselves resonated at specific frequencies. If enough acoustic energy could be focused on a single vessel. The test came in São Paulo. The city's carnival musicians, accustomed to playing for crowds of millions, gathered in the city center. They were joined by every person who could bang a drum, blow a whistle, or shout in coordinated rhythm. Construction workers brought air horns, children brought kazoos. Even car enthusiasts gathered with their old mechanical horns from vintage automobiles. At precisely noon, 300,000 people created a focused acoustic assault aimed directly at the largest alien ship hovering over the city. The ship's hull began to vibrate visibly. Then, impossibly, cracks appeared along its surface. The elegant obsidian material that had seemed indestructible split like an eggshell under the coordinated sonic pressure. The ship didn't crash, it simply came apart, its pieces floating gently to the ground as if the gravity manipulation that held it together had simply stopped working. The aliens aboard survived, but their expressions showed something humanity hadn't seen before. Fear. For the first time since the invasion began, the regular 6-hour message from the alien fleet was delayed. When it finally came, the tone had changed completely. Attention, human species. Your resistance methods are unprecedented. We require time to reevaluate our mission parameters. In the underground command center, General Martinez looked around at his staff of scientists, soldiers, and civilians. I think, he said slowly, they're asking for a timeout. Dr. Chen nodded, then keyed her microphone to broadcast on all human frequencies. All stations. All stations. Maintain acoustic readiness, but hold fire. It appears our visitors want to talk. Around the world, humans kept their instruments ready but lowered them slightly. They had learned something important. When 8 billion humans decided to sing the same song, the universe itself had to listen. The aliens were beginning to understand that humanity wasn't just refusing to leave their planet. They were actively making it impossible for anyone else to stay. The negotiations began on day 29, conducted through the same mental communication system the aliens had used for their ultimatum. But this time, humanity had found a way to respond directly. A team of Tibetan monks, working with neuroscientists who had studied meditation for decades, discovered they could project thoughts back along the aliens' communication channel through deep meditative states. The response that echoed into the alien fleet carried the collective voice of humanity, spoken through the minds of 12 monks sitting in perfect silence on a mountaintop in the Himalayas. "We are not leaving." The alien response came within minutes, tinged with what could only be described as exasperation. "Your species is maladapted for preservation protocols. You demonstrate illogical attachment to planetary location. Other species relocate efficiently when presented with superior force." The monks transmitted humanity's reply. "We are not other species." What followed was humanity's first real conversation with an alien civilization, mediated by ancient meditation techniques and the kind of stubborn curiosity that had driven humans to split atoms and walk on the moon. The aliens, it emerged, were called the Shepherds. For over 10,000 years, they had traveled the galaxy, relocating species from planets they deemed damaged or needed for other purposes. They had perfected the process through repetition. Most intelligent species, when faced with overwhelming technological superiority, chose survival over sentiment. They had never encountered a species that considered the concept of home more important than survival itself. "Your planet shows signs of ecological damage, resource depletion, and atmospheric contamination," the Shepherds transmitted. "We offer preservation and rehabilitation in more suitable environments." The human response came not just from the monks, but from millions of minds thinking in unison. "Then help us fix it here." This concept seemed to short-circuit the Shepherds' understanding entirely. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now part of the communication team, helped craft humanity's proposal through the monks. "You claim we have damaged our planet. We don't deny this. But running away from problems is not the human way. We fix things. We adapt. We make messes and we clean them up. If you want to help us repair what we've broken. If not, leave us alone to do it ourselves." The silence from the alien fleet lasted 18 hours. When the response finally came, it carried something that might have been confusion. Species typically accept relocation when offered superior alternatives. Why do you choose planetary attachment over advancement? The answer came from an unexpected source. Children around the world who had been listening to the mental conversations with the fascination only children could muster began contributing their own thoughts to the transmission. Their response was simple and devastating, because it's ours. Not possession in the legal sense, but belonging in the way roots belong to soil, the way music belongs to musicians, the way stories belong to the people who tell them. The children transmitted images along with their words, families gathered around dinner tables, gardens planted by grandparents and tended by grandchildren, cave paintings 40,000 years old, still watched over by the descendants of their creators. The Shepherds had encountered countless intelligent species, but they had apparently never met one that refused to be improved. The final transmission from humanity was longer, compiled from voices across the globe and sent through the minds of the Tibetan monks. "We understand you see yourselves as gardeners, tending the galaxy's intelligent life. But we are not flowers to be transplanted. We are weeds, stubborn, adaptable, and impossible to remove. We grow in cracks in concrete and flourish in soil you think is ruined. You see a damaged planet. We see home that needs work. You offer us a place in your galactic garden. We offer you something better, the knowledge that not everything in the universe needs to be fixed by someone else. The response, when it came, was unlike anything the shepherds had transmitted before. It carried what might have been respect. The shepherds acknowledge human species demonstrates unprecedented attachment to planetary origin. Recommendation for preservation protocol, leave intact. Warning, environmental damage will likely result in species extinction within several thousand rotations. We know, humanity replied. We'll handle it. This has never been attempted by a species at your technological level. Good. We like being first. The alien ships began to rise on the 30th day, not retreating, but departing with the slow dignity of those who had made a decision they still didn't entirely understand. As the massive vessels climbed toward the edge of Earth's atmosphere, they left behind something unexpected. A transmission not of words, but of data. Atmospheric readings, soil composition analyses, oceanic health reports, and detailed scans of environmental damage. Information that would have taken human scientists decades to compile. A gift, perhaps, or maybe just professional courtesy from one species to another. The final message from the shepherds came as their ships disappeared into the darkness between stars. The galaxy will observe this experiment with interest. May your stubborn attachment to the unsuitable prove viable. In the aftermath, as power grids came back online and the world began to return to something resembling normal, humanity found itself changed. Not by alien technology or cosmic revelation, but by the simple knowledge that 8 billion people could agree on something when it mattered. The instruments of resistance became instruments of celebration. Jazz musicians in New Orleans played victory songs that could be heard for miles. The Vienna Philharmonic gave a concert that was simultaneously transmitted through shortwave radio to every corner of the globe. Tibetan monks taught meditation techniques to scientists, who discovered that human consciousness could accomplish things they had never imagined. Children kept their hiding places, turning them into secret clubhouses and thinking spots. The elderly engineers who had rebuilt vacuum tube technology became heroes to a new generation of inventors who understood that progress didn't always require abandoning the past. And in small towns and great cities, on mountains and in valleys, in every place humans had ever called home, people looked up at the stars and smiled. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but Earth belonged to humanity. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because they had decided it was theirs and refused to be convinced otherwise. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the shepherds were learning what every invader in human history had eventually discovered: humans were much easier to kill than to move.